I was so excited to get my shipment from Last Bottle Wines in the mail the other day, full of incredible red wines, all from Napa Valley. I love wine tasting, so having this to my door couldn't be happier. Also, couldn't be more excited that today's episode is brought to you by Last Bottle Wines. If you don't know already, they're a Napa-based online wine shop with a twist. They offer just one handpicked wine per day until it sells out, and they're always at incredible prices. We're talking 30 to 70% off retail. And the best part is that there's no subscriptions, no fees, and no minimum purchase. And I could not be more excited to bring this offer right now because they're having a marathon sale, which is coming up March 28th and 29th. Even better, we're offering Dateable listeners 10% off your first order with code DATEABLE. So if you are a wine lover like me, this is a great time to join. And did I mention that shipping is 100% free? So what are you waiting for? Mark your calendar for March 28th and 29th, or get on it earlier if you want. You can sign up at lastbottlewines.com and use code DATEABLE and find out why Last Bottle is the most fun way to discover and buy amazing wine. We are so thrilled to be partnering with Hinge. Hinge is the dating app designed to be deleted. As you all know, I'm a huge Hinge advocate as I met my partner of almost 3 years on the app. Even before meeting him, Hinge was always my go-to app because I met more relationship-minded people here and had some great dates. Clearly, I haven't been on the app for a little while, but I re-downloaded it to check out some of the new features. One that stood out to me was the voice prompt, my best friend's take on why you should date me, where your friend can hype you up. Not only does this make the profile creation less daunting, but it's not always easy to see your own green flags. So to test it out, I asked Yue some fun prompts to get her take on what I could put if I was dating again. So the first one, how long have we known each other? What was your first impression of me and how has that changed?
Julie and I have known each other for almost 10 years. My first impression of Julie was that she's very social, but I've learned that she has a lot more depth to her beyond the social butterfly that she is.
My next prompt, what do you think are my green flags?
I would say she's deeply loyal. She believes in love, curious mindset, and she is fearlessly ambitious.
And then last but not least, what kind of friend am I?
Julie is the kind of friend who will always have your back, no matter what.
Damn, that feels nice to hear. So download Hinge and try voice prompts today. Then find someone worth deleting the app for.
The Dateable podcast features real stories from real people of how they make modern dating work, or not. I'm your host, Yue, former dating coach turned dating insider, if you will. On each episode, you'll hear commentary from my producer, Julie Krafchick, and other surprise co-hosts. This episode of Dateable is brought to you by 500 Brunches. 500 Brunches connects like-minded people with similar interests to meet in real life over brunch. You answer a quick questionnaire about your interests and how you spend your time, and then they'll match you in small groups of 6 to 8 at a brunch spot in San Francisco. Get a free entry into a brunch now by signing up at 500brunches.com and using the code DATEABLE. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Dateable, a show all about modern dating. Let's get serious for this episode, yeah? Because we're serious in every episode, but this topic I think is something that we've been talking about for a little bit on other episodes, but we wanted to devote an entire episode to what we want to talk about today, which is mental health. When we think about mental health, what does it encompass? According to mentalhealth.gov, it includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. Also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices, aka dating. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood and adolescence through adulthood. Many factors contribute to mental health problems, including biological factors, genes or brain chemistry, life experiences, trauma, abuse, family history, all of that. I feel like it's only in recent years we've really talked about mental health in this culture.
Yeah.
And sort of normalize this idea of mental health, because back in the day,
stigmatized.
it was so stigmatized when I was a child. You just don't. If someone's in therapy, you're like, oh my God, there's something really wrong with them, right? But now mental health is something. It's almost like going to the gym. If you go to the gym to work out your body, you should also go see a therapist to work out your mind.
Yeah.
So with that, we have Jonathan Trampham here. He is the founder of Reflect, which is a mental health platform that reimagines in-person therapy to be more accessible and effective. And Jonathan's been in San Francisco for 7 years, originally from Texas. He's 37. He questioned if that was still mid-30s. I'm 37 as well. And I like to say I'm mid-30s,
I think most people call that.
Like 38 is when you're like, okay, that's late 30s. But
that
37,
1 year difference.
Yeah, that 1 year difference. He is single and actively going on dates. You don't have to be quiet anymore, Jonathan. I love it. We've been talking this whole time and he's like giving me all these like visual cues, like nodding his head. But now you can make a noise.
I'm here. Thanks for having me, guys.
I think I'm super excited to have you because I think mental health has definitely been having a moment lately, especially I think Reflect, all the other online therapy platforms too have just made it a lot more accessible. What we were kind of saying earlier is historically there's something wrong with you if you saw a therapist. But now it's so easy and it's so more mainstream. So I think there's that side of it. But then there's also the recent suicides that have come from a lot of celebrities that have kind of why we started reaching out to you and wanted to have this conversation.
And suicide is a 10th leading cause of death in the US. I don't know what it is in other countries, but it's also up there.
Yeah.
And
Australia, right? Was
Australia,
very high.
The highest male suicide rate is in Australia, which is surprising for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But it just shows you that you never know what someone's going through. And even with the recent, suicides of Kate Spade, Avicii, Anthony Bourdain, nobody saw that side. And it just shows that you never know someone's journey. And it's okay now that we can talk about it and how to get past this journey, not alone, but with a third party's help, right? So Jonathan, what got you into this space, I guess, of therapy, but also making it accessible for others?
Well, that's a great question. And first of all, thank you for having me. This is such an important topic. And I think the conversation is long overdue. So I'm glad that we're having the conversation.
Yes.
I'll come out and tell you that I'm not a clinician. I actually came to mental health very much as a client. I studied organizational psychology in college. I spent about a decade working in consulting, helping businesses grow, launch products, enter new markets, ran marketing for a startup in the fashion space. All that to say, a few years ago, I realized I was stressed and been stressed for a very long time. Thank you, Tiger Mom. And it was actually my roommate who suggested therapy to me in the first place. I thought I was in a funk. Now looking back, I realized I suffer from anxiety, but it was something that I didn't really talk about and I didn't really think it was different because everyone in my life was a type A overachiever. So it didn't seem like it was that different.
Yeah.
And when she said, have you thought about therapy? I think my exact words were, hell no, I am not crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So I've come a very long way from what we call pre-contemplative to actually being an advocate for therapy. And I think it goes back to your point around stigma and the idea that it's so hard to get help. And for me, it wasn't actually even the stigma. Once I got over the fact that I wanted to find a therapist, it was my 6-month search for a therapist that added more stress to my life.
I can see that. You're I'm trying to avoid stress, but I'm getting more stress.
That was what made me feel alone. And as I talked to more and more people, I realized this is a really big problem. 80% of people who have a mental health issue never find the right care.
I totally believe that because I don't even know where you go before your company.
You might do a little Googling and you might ask around, but really that's where it ends.
I like that you brought up stress as a major indicator for when you were I think I might need to seek help of some sort. I was listening to this podcast called Unfuck Your Brain. She was basically saying people think when you're stressed, that's a productive feeling. If you're stressed, then you're accomplishing something. If you're stressed, then you're doing yourself a favor in a way and you should feel good about it. But she's stress is actually a mental health issue. When you have stress, you need to address it because it's actually very unproductive.
Mm,
So
interesting.
I thought that was really interesting to think about, because people think mental health is like depression or suicidal thoughts. It doesn't have to be that drastic even.
So that's a good segue, because I want to talk about like what are the differences, because I think there's one side of mental health that's new and trendy with therapy and meditation and all this stuff of like kind of optimizing your mental health. And then there's another side of just diagnosed illnesses. Can you kind of talk to that a little more?
I think that's a great question. It's a great kind of nuance to the conversation, because I think folks come to the topic of mental health with very different biases based off of maybe their own experience, what they grew up with. And again, because I'm not a clinician, I don't want to get into the diagnosis.
Okay.
I will say that the American Psychiatric Association publishes a guideline around mental health illnesses called the DSM, which outlines the criteria for various different diagnoses for different diseases like bipolar or schizophrenia. But I think mental health is a little more nuanced than that. And I think similarly with physical health, I suffer from acid reflux, and my back is a little bit achy sometimes if I work out too much.
it's because you're in your mid-30s.
Because I'm in my... Thank you. Whew. But you wouldn't say that you're either healthy or you're unhealthy, right? There's not that same binary feeling. But the idea that, I've seen some definitions of mental health is the absence of mental illness. And I think that's really kind of overly simplistic, because it really is a spectrum.
Yep.
And I think about that. And I think because it's seen as this binary, you're either great and you're in control, or you're crazy. Which, by the way, that's what my old self 3 years ago thought.
Me too.
Right. So what would you say is like the difference then between like being diagnosed with clinical depression versus more situational depression?
Yeah, I think it's so funny, because we as a society put so much value on labels, right? And even the way that insurance thinks about mental health is you have to have a diagnosis code. Fun fact, guys, 60% of anxiety and depression share the same symptoms. And most of my friends have been misdiagnosed many times. I mean, there are clear, again, through the DSM, reasons and criteria for different diseases. But for many of us, it's a journey in and out. Some days, the same thing may make me more anxious. Other days, it makes me less anxious.
Yeah.
Just like with high blood pressure, you have it some days, you don't have it other days, depending on diet, depending on your environment. I think, if it is a medical emergency, obviously you should go and consult an expert. If it's something that's an urgent issue, you should go see the ER, go to a healthcare professional. Apart from very severe situations, in my opinion, it's very much a spectrum. We have partnerships with a bunch of medical providers across the Bay Area, and they say actually 70% of their patients present with mental health related symptoms. But we think it's migraines. We think it's tightness of chest. We think it's difficulty sleeping.
Interesting.
And so I think what's really hard about mental health is it's something that we're only starting to understand. And I think it's way behind physical health in our understanding of it. And so, 30 years ago, I used to do a lot of work in oncology and cancer. And 30 years ago, we said you have cancer. Now we say you have non-small cell lung cancer with an EGFR mutation. I think mental health is moving that direction. So because people get misdiagnosed so much, whether or not you are diagnosed doesn't change the fact that you could still benefit from care.
That's also an interesting point, because Julie and I were just talking about how when you go see a therapist, is it reactive or should it be proactive, right? And mental health, a lot of times we think about you need like a compelling reason to go see a therapist, like you're going through heartbreak or you're having a hard time at work or transitioning. But sometimes you may not need a reason. It's a check-in, so it's more preventative care.
Well, I think if you had parents or went to high school, that's a reason enough to go to therapy.
In all respects.
To that. And I always say this, at Reflect, we say that you don't wait to have a heart attack to go to the gym. Why do we wait to have a panic attack to go see a therapist?
It's so true.
And our vision is we want to be the gym for your soul, in the sense that it is a place to go to before your cup is completely full. Because I think this reactive nature of waiting till it's really bad, urgently looking for somebody, not finding the right care, spiraling out of control, is something that I think so many of my friends experience because we wait till it's really, really bad. And many of our therapists say, I would love to work with clients before it gets really bad because their cup is not full.
Yeah.
So you can learn better coping skills. You can learn how to process things in a different way. Because for me, therapy is really interesting because our minds are full of pathways we have laid out over time. And I imagine like a field. and you've walked on the same path for so long on the field to get from point A to point B, that you forget that there are other ways of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have space and it's not urgent and it's not reactive, you're able to examine thought patterns in a different way and work proactively with your therapist to be able to say, hey, how would I want to see the situation? How would I want to behave in this situation? What can I do to change and influence the future situation? So it's not like waiting until something bad happens, but it's really about being your best self.
But I do think like it is like sometimes a solution to a problem. So I do see why people, like I remember when I first reached out for therapy, it was after a bad breakup. So it definitely took like that time. Yes, I probably could have benefited from it years before in theory, but sometimes it does take that like feeling of being depressed to actually seek out help.
I think it comes from this myth or a misrepresentation of therapy where people think therapy is like going to a fortune teller. They're going to give you all the life answers and give you direction on what to do. And I remember when we first started having this conversation, Julie and I, because Julie's like, this is what therapy's like, and I never experienced it. She's like, it's not about giving you answers.
Because you kept being like, well, what are you learning?
Yeah,
like, what tools are you getting? Like, it's not like that.
It's not like that.
Explain it.
It's more just like, I almost feel like it's more one, talking out everything that you've been holding in.
Yes.
So letting that out. And two is also getting to know yourself much better on a much deeper level that's in an unbiased perspective, right? I dated this guy for a while before he told me he had depression issues, and it was passed down from his family. And when we finally talked about it, it was so fascinating to me and enlightening to me because he's like, I treat it like getting a cold. It's like, I know the symptoms of when I'm about to get depressed, and I know when I am in that deep depression, what that feels like. So in the future, I know exactly what to do in that situation. It's not debilitating at all because he knows how to cope with it. But I want to know, like, where do you think the stigma of mental health issues came from? Is it because back in the day, the people you knew who were in therapy had major issues, and those are the only people that you thought were in therapy?
I think about this a lot, and I think it comes back to the fact that there's this archetype and a mental model we have in our minds about crazy Uncle Larry, right? Or people that were sent to the asylum. And when I was kind of doing some research for this conversation, I realized even the idea of being gay was something that was still in the DSM, a disease state, until 1986.
Wow, yeah.
How far we've come in just our understanding of one specific thing that we used to think was really stigmatized. I think it comes from this fact of a disease where there's a lot of shame attached to it, and so we don't talk about it. Even though 1 in 5 Americans has a diagnosable mental health issue, even though half of Americans will experience a significant mental health issue in their lifetime, we still feel like when it happens to us, we're the only ones.
Yeah.
And that shame really feeds upon itself. The really crappy thing about anxiety and depression is they actually have in their pathology, one of the symptoms is the idea of feeling alone. When you have anxiety or depression, you actually end up reclusing yourself and moving up and pulling away. And that pulling away actually causes for you to reinforce the feeling that you are alone because there's no one else definitionally around you. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy a little bit. Even, they say that when you're stressed and when you're in that fight or flight mentality, your peripheral vision even narrows. So the idea of having optionality or having other things you can do to get out of this, it's really hard. Even though it's so prevalent, even though 20% of Americans have a diagnosable mental health issue, and half of Americans will experience a significant mental health issue in their lifetime, we still feel alone. Yeah.
So one of the things that caught our attention to have you as a guest was this post that you had put on LinkedIn that basically said, I truly believe that mental health is the crisis of our generation. The 2 high-profile suicides this week, R.I.P. Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain, are yet more reminders that many of us suffer in silence. And those who are, quotes, successful are far from immune. I'm more committed than ever to the work Reflect is doing to improve access and end stigma. If you know someone who may need help, please be a resource and have uncomfortable conversations. And if you have questions on how, message me. The problem needs all of our help solving, which I think is so eloquent, so I wanted to read it. But why do you think that mental health is the crisis of our generation? That's a bold statement.
Here's a crazy fact. The number 1 cause of disability in America today is depression. I think the reason why is because our mental health affects our physical health, and our mental health affects who we see in the mirror. The reason it's a crisis is because if we're suffering in silence and we're not dealing with the root cause, we're just basically putting Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you think about in the dating situation, so much of our mental health affects our own self-esteem, how we see ourselves, how we see our loved ones. And so you can be frustrated with the symptom of, oh, I'm not dating sucks, or this is difficult. But if you don't get to the root cause of what might be driving that, you're always going to be suffering. And it's going to be something that doesn't ever get better until you deal with it.
I do feel like dating fatigue, when people blame it on the apps or blame it on modern dating,
Yes.
it stems from something much deeper than that. And sometimes it could just stem from something from your childhood.
Yep.
But that's what going to a therapist would help you uncover. It's not just like, oh, the apps suck. It's not that simple.
Right.
Which, by the way, I do agree that the apps, not just dating apps, but also Facebook and Instagram and other apps, have a huge effect on our mental health.
Absolutely.
And that could be a total different podcast, but that is really, I think, one of the reasons it's come to such a heat right now is because the information that our brains have to process on a daily basis is way more than at any other point in time in human history.
Well, I heard the millennial generation are the loneliest. And I think that's really compelling to hear too, because millennials are the most connected generation in terms of digitally, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's online, but also they're the most lonely because they feel most disconnected from humanity.
Totally.
Isn't this sad? I mean,
is
that's
sad.
really sad. So when you're saying suffering in silence, that's what this generation's doing. They're suffering in silence.
And someone told me once that happiness is expectation minus reality. And I thought that was such an interesting frame, because no matter how good your reality is, if what you see on social media, the expectation of your life is better. And so the idea that there's such a disconnect between what we're seeing, what we should be doing, or what our life should be, and this FOMO idea versus what our real lives are, I think that disconnect and that dissonance is really what exacerbates mental health.
So what are some other ways that you think that mental health plays into dating, since this is obviously a dating podcast?
I mean, I think so much of how we see ourselves and how we relate to other people comes very much to surface when we think about dating. Because a lot of dating is about your own self-esteem.
Yes.
A lot of dating is about how you treat other people, how you react to how people treat you. And so, I think about, I'm still very much single. And for a long time, I had this story in my head that, I'm just destined to be alone. Or a story in my head that, oh, the dating scene sucks.
We all have that narrative in our heads, right? You're not the only one.
And thank you for saying that, because I think when you feel it,
you think you're the only one.
You're the only one.
Yeah.
And you see everyone's relationship status on Facebook, or you see these great wedding, baby announcements. And again, you realize that I think all of us work on different parts of our relationship, even when we are in relationships. And I don't think mental health is something that's only when you're dating that's a problem. It's only when you're in a relationship. In fact, we look at the reasons why people come to therapy, and almost 70% of those who come to therapy cite relationship stress or dating issues as reasons why they come to therapy.
So what are some of the top issues that they're reporting, if you can disclose that?
Well, I can say in general, oftentimes it's like you said, either it's a bad breakup or it's frustration with not being in a relationship and the ebb and flows of kind of stop and starts of dating.
Yep.
Right? This,
the loneliness.
Really. The getting to date 3 and someone ghosting, or the as life gets so busy, oftentimes what happens is someone might be ghosting because they had a really bad work issue. But on the receiving end, we look at that as it's something about me.
Yep.
And it's really funny that I think I read this other article that said that 80% of people, when they're dating someone who's not feeling, their person's not feeling it, they want the person to say, "Hey, I really like you as a friend, but I don't feel us moving forward." Yet when we're in the situation where we're feeling that way, 20% of us actually do have that conversation.
Yeah. 20, that's pretty high. Maybe 2%.
I also remember in my early 20s when I was starting to date more, having major anxiety if I would text someone and I wouldn't hear back from them. And some of that still exists today. I won't pretend it's totally gone, but I think some of it, just understanding yourself and how do you cope with this? Thinking of okay, well, they may not be near their phone. They may be in work, different situations, and kind of trying to work through it more.
Yeah. With such a connected society today with your phone, right? Everything's online. Everything is on your phone. I feel like with modern dating, when I date one person, I'm actually dating two people. One is the person in real life, the
Yes.
person I actually see. And the other person is the person that when they're not with me in real life. And I make up all these stories about their other life. You know, I think about like the times when they're not texting back, oh, they're probably on a date with someone else. Or they're like having some fabulous time at some like rooftop party. And I don't really know that, but I think that's a problem with being so connected on the internet is that you assume that person is not thinking about you, which drives you to feel lonelier.
But I could definitely see how this plays into anxiety for
Yes.
sure.
Oh my gosh. We are, they say ignorance is bliss for a reason, because I think the ability to think through these stories, what they might be doing. And I'll tell you guys a story. I was dating this guy very early on in our relationship, and we were out of town, and we ended up having a small fight that ended up spiraling. And I realized it was because there were certain triggers that were going on that were triggering me to feel a certain way, that then were triggering him to feel in a different way. And it ended up leading to a pretty big conflict. And I was very thankful that I was in therapy at the time, where I could go in and talk to my therapist about this, unpack what were the reasons why, and really understand, well, what was I doing that made me feel a certain way, and what was he doing that made me feel this way, and vice versa. And I think the awareness piece is so important when it comes to dating, because you can really easily go down that mental pathway that you've kind of walked through 37 years of your life and say, oh, this is happening because he doesn't like me, or this is happening because I'm not, no one wants to date me.
Right.
But by pausing a little bit and actually having a venue to process the things that are happening relatively real time and say, okay, what are the reasons why this might be happening? And how much of it is me and how much of it is his own issues?
Yep.
And actually, that's a really important delineation that we don't make in our minds.
It is. I think actually like that was definitely a turning point for myself when I started. Well, I think part of it was like when I was in a relationship and really understood someone else's perspective and what they were going through. It's like, it's not all about you. Just because you're thinking one way, they're also thinking a different way. Then there's also just like, they may not be in front of their phone right this minute. Like things that are just so obvious, but it can really start to spiral unless you have that like kind of mental capacity to start thinking of the various situations.
What I loved about therapy was this idea that I can process it, and then I can sort of think about, okay, how would I want to react the next time it happens? And then sort of let's start to create new pathways in our brain and practice those things so that when it happens again and someone doesn't text me or something doesn't happen and someone ghosts, you don't freak out and send 10 text, not that I was doing that.
Sure done. Just to clarify. 100 texts later and a knock on the door.
He's our next guest.
But I think that behavior, the insight plus the behavior change. And for me, that's why I'm so passionate about therapy, is because it is this great sounding board to be able to process patterns that you might not even know that are happening. And that awareness is the first like seed that then can lead to change that can actually help you become the person that you want to be, or at least deal with the ups and downs, because you can't control whether someone's going to call you back. You can't control whether someone actually ends up wanting to date you or not. But you can control how you react to that situation. And how much you internalize that versus how much do you recognize, feel, validate those feelings, and then take the lessons you need to take to move on.
So this is a really important distinction for me when it comes to therapy is, one of the stigmas for like Asian cultures when it comes to therapy is that it's such a selfish thing to do. Well, why are you so focused on yourself? Why are you going to pay someone just to talk about yourself? Okay. What I find so amazing about therapy is that once you start taking the focus off of yourself, and it helps you process how you treat others. Right? Because before then, I would always have this victim mentality. Why is this happening to me? Why am I feeling this way? But then after therapy, you're like, wait, why do I treat others this way? And why do other people treat me this way? So it actually takes the focus off of yourself.
Totally. And I think just like if you can like talk through it, have less anxiety and depression, or always thinking of like worst case scenario, you can actually start to think, like, I remember my therapist saying this, like, it's like if you're not like on the same page with some behavior that's happening with your partner, instead of just being like, okay, I'm done. Like they're not acting the way I want to. First of all, they're not a mind reader. They don't even know that you don't want them to act that way. So it's like, have a conversation with them, let them know your needs and all of that. And then if they keep doing it, like, have a conversation again.
Yeah.
And then obviously if they just keep disregarding you, then that could get to the point that you're like, is this the right fit? But instead of just like blowing it off like from that very first time when you haven't even like had that communication, it's kind of like if you kind of can get the rest of your emotions in check, I think you can think clearer about like the longer picture.
Yeah, there's this concept of thinking about it lately, and it's this term that I made up. Take it for what it's worth. But it's thoughtful agency. To your point, it really gives you power and agency to be able to understand the world differently and also change your behavior to recognize what can you do in a situation to actually influence the outcome. So you're not just the victim.
Yep.
There are more options than you think. There are more possible explanations than you think.
Yep.
And so if this is something that starts to happen over and over again, you can actually start to change your behavior or your mentality to be more resilient or to treat other people better.
Yep.
And I think that ultimately is the opposite of selfish. It's actually the most thoughtful thing you can do is being able to take ownership in how you treat other people and recognize that it's not, there's multiple ways of seeing the world than the way you see it.
I guess we're not trying to sell therapy on this episode. I think just focusing on your mental health is the most important thing that we want to promote here. And when you do that, dating becomes better, not because all of a sudden you're going to attract all these people and you're going to meet the love of your life right away. It's not that.
Trust me, you can start a mental health startup, and still there's not the line out the door.
But it's the way you're processing it. And the way that you're not feeling anxious. Like, I just had this happened this morning. This guy messaged me on Tinder and was like, oh, like, do you want to meet up for like today? And I was like, sure, sounds great. Gave him my number, and I like checked back and saw he unmatched me, which was really bizarre. But I think like my old self would have been what the heck? What the heck? And then like maybe like thinking up stories, and I'm like, you know what? Like, if he unmatched me, like, good for him.
That's your issue.
I don't care. Like,
that's so odd.
It is odd, but I'm just saying, like, I think it's an example of like how I might have like if I was not in a place that like I could think more clearly, and like also it's like a value of yourself, then like you could it could really go down a rabbit hole.
It's just
you could be depressed all day about it.
I know. It could ruin your whole week, really.
Right.
But I think it's about like putting yourself, having an outer body experience. So when something like that does happen to you, you kind of like see yourself from another perspective and say like, it's not a big deal.
You're like his loss.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
What's really amazing is, this is something that I only realized very recently. I think you made this point earlier, Julie, that like not everyone reacts to the same situation the same way. Yeah. And not all of us even see the same situation the same way.
Yeah.
But for a long time, I was like, well, if I were him, I would do this.
Yeah. Right, but you're not.
Well, guess what? You're not. And I think that's a really important distinction because it makes us more empathetic and more open to the fact that maybe people don't have malicious intent, but they're just doing the best they can with what they got.
Totally. I think this actually segues really nicely to this other side of mental health. So I've had close friends, I've dated people that have just like diagnosed clinical depression that has nothing to do with dating. That's just comes in and out of their lives. That's just part of like they've had this from very early ages.
Yeah.
If you're dating someone that is experiencing this, what are some ways that like you can like make it work with them?
It's time to take a quick break so we can tell you about our current sponsor, ModCloth. At ModCloth, there's no such thing as an ordinary outfit. Crafted by a team of in-house designers, ModCloth's signature styles include hand-drawn prints, standout silhouettes, and an inclusive size range that celebrates all women. They offer a full range of sizes from extra, extra small to 4X. ModCloth has tons of stylish outerwear attire that's sure to make an impression. You know, I've already started to put holiday parties on my calendar, so I went on modcloth.com and searched for dresses in the party and cocktail section. They had such an incredible variety. I'm currently debating between this glam pink velvet dress and this green lace dress. Seriously, so much to choose from. Whichever I end up picking, it'll be an outfit to remember. If you're also feeling festive, be sure to check out their holiday gift guide, featuring unique finds and perfect prezzies for everyone on your list, yourself included. To get 15% off your purchase of $100 or more, go to modcloth.com and enter the code DATEABLE at checkout. Again, that's modcloth.com and enter the code DATEABLE at checkout. The offer ends February 2nd, so make your purchase today. Now, back to the show.
If you're dating someone that is experiencing this, what are some ways that you can make it work with them?
I think every situation is different.
Yeah.
So I don't want to give this advice to everybody. And this should be taken on a case-by-case basis.
Totally.
Whether it's anxiety, depression, borderline, whatever the issue is, when you're the loved one, we all have a tendency to want to solve the problem.
Yes.
And it's so much true in America.
Yes.
And it's
sometimes
much true
that's
now.
not what's helping.
And that's not what's helpful. And even when, I was feeling anxious, I would have friends or loved ones that would be like, just snap out of it.
Yeah.
Or you have a great life. Why can't you just, you're great. Can't you just see that? And I think that what we want to hear in those situations is just that someone's there for us.
Yes.
And that they're supporting us, and that there's space, that they will be here for us. And I think that safety to be able to know that that person really can meet you where you're at is the best gift you can give someone that you love.
Totally.
When I went to couples counseling, that was my biggest takeaway, was to validate your partner's feelings. Even if you don't agree with how they feel, you can't argue with that because that's how they feel. You're not them. Mm-hmm. So you've got to validate your partner.
And I think also respecting space, like you said, is a big one, because it's sometimes you'd be like, I want to spend every minute with someone. But if they're in a depressive state and they need their alone time, it's sometimes you're just I have to pull back a little and give them what they need at this point.
And sometimes that means that someone might not be in the space to be dating.
Yeah.
Right? What was great about that story you said earlier about the guy who was recognizing he has chronic depression and he knows the symptoms and he's dealing with it is, I think we all are on our own journeys to understand our own selves.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that we suffer, the things that trigger us, whatever that might be. And we can create space for somebody else and we can try to be there. They could also not be ready themselves.
Yes.
And so, yes, if you're the person in the situation, it's great to seek care and get help. And it can be everything from a mindfulness app to therapy to something more, more serious help. But as the other person, you can be there and you can help as much as you can. But you also, I think it's really important to remember that this is their journey that they're going on as well.
Yeah.
Because I think when you love someone, there's also a tendency to say, I will be there and I can fix it. And if it doesn't work out, it's something I did. And I think separating that as well. So you want to create space and love someone unconditionally, but also know if they're not ready and don't have the space to be in a relationship, the best thing you can do is let them deal with themselves first. And then if it's meant to be, it'll come back.
And I think you have to communicate that with your partner, because with the guy I was dating, I wanted to know his process. He's like, when I'm in that depressive state, I don't want to see anybody or talk to anybody for 6 days. He was very specific. He's like, 6 days, I'm not going to see you for 6 days. And I had to be okay with that, but at least we had that conversation.
Yeah.
And you can't take it personally, because that's what he needs to feel healthier.
That's right. But in the absence of information, you'll make up stories for 6 days.
Here for someone for 6 days.
Yeah,
God knows what would go
it's
through
a
your
really
head.
long
But
time.
I think the verbal confirmations, I've had this as well. It's just being this has nothing to do with you. This is me going through that is really helpful to someone that is on that receiving side of it.
I mean, okay, so I have an emotional support animal. My dog is certified emotional support. And when I started taking the quiz, I was like, oh my God, yes, I suffer from this and this and this and this. I think people just need to recognize, I don't think the statistics are right. I would say 100% of people are experiencing some sort of mental health issues.
Again, if you have parents, if you went to high school, I think we're all on a journey. And I love that the idea that it's 100% because there's nothing wrong with it being 100%.
Mm-hmm.
It's 100% because we're all living in the world. It's 100% because we all have been on dates, or we all want to be loved, or we all, have that journey. And I think recognizing that it is 100% and there's nothing wrong with it being 100% is, I think, really, really powerful to help destigmatize.
So let's flip the roles in Julie's question, which is, what if you are someone suffering from mental health issues and you're dating someone? How should you approach this partnership?
I think it comes back down to your point around communication. Whether you have a diagnosable issue or whether you're someone who this is a late night owl, right? Or you're someone who needs your alone time, or it's any part of your persona that could influence and impact somebody else, whether it's diagnosable or not. It's great to have the conversation thoughtfully and at the appropriate time. And so I think about that a lot in terms of even my friendships and being able to say, hey, this is something that I'm having a tough time right now. This is something that I need from friends. I think we oftentimes don't have that conversation. We jump straight to they're a bad friend because they didn't do this for us.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And so I don't think you need to have a diagnosable mental health issue to rely on the importance of communication.
Yeah.
And if you happen to have a diagnosable issue, or if you happen to have tendencies around anxiety or depression, then it's just one more reason to have that conversation.
Yeah.
But it's nothing unique that you wouldn't want to have in any other relationship that you're part of.
I think
for any other
sometimes
reason.
people don't want to be a burden. I think that's
Yeah.
what comes up a lot.
Yeah.
So what would you say to people? That's a thought. Like, I don't want to bring it up to them because I don't want to be a burden. I don't want them to have to deal with this and all that.
I will say, as someone who is Asian, as well, this idea of burdening your friends, and I have this idea of like the good friend shouldn't ask for these things. That's my story in my head. So, and there's a lot of, I think in the Asian community, it's about what can you do for other people? What is your duty to other people? Never being, demanding or asking what people can do for you. And I think one of my biggest fears for a long time was coming across as selfish and coming across as demanding. So I would over-index and not state those things.
Yeah.
I think one of my good friends
I did that too, not as an Asian.
It's a Jewish guild. The Asian guild, Jewish guild are the same.
Same. I just saw Crazy Rich Asians. Like,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I'm not rich, but the other two I can check out.
We've seen it twice.
We've seen
it.
But, a really good friend of mine said to me recently, she goes, you will never come across as demanding or selfish, and because you're so far removed from that. And I think when you are someone who's afraid of coming across that way, then you're probably not likely to come across that way.
Because that is a really good point.
Because you're overcompensating.
You're overcompensating.
And I think a lot of times, like, being on the receiving side, you do want that person to come to you. Like, I think there's, like, a bond that feels closer if someone is telling you about their personal struggles and all of that. And a lot of times you're not a burden. You're actually, like, they want to be there for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's about, it's two things. It's about being able to ask for others what you need, but it's also recognizing that you can also self-soothe.
Yep.
And there's this concept around mindful self-compassion and how do you help soothe yourself and how do you think about self-care and all of those things. And so I think being more thoughtful about your own mental health allows you to take more agency in your own life. And also, once you're doing that, then asking for help from other people doesn't feel as hard because you're realizing I'm taking the steps I need to take for myself.
Right.
And one of those steps is to ask for help from others.
Well, I think that's a great way to talk about some solutions for people or some tools. If someone is experiencing mental health issues or they feel like they may be, let's just not self-diagnose. Let's say therapy is not an option right now. What are some other ways people can work on their mental health?
I think there's so many great apps and resources online that you can use to be able to get more information and help build skills. So just like mental health is a spectrum, the care options are a spectrum as well. And on one hand, there's lots of great free apps that are out there like Calm or Headspace or Simple Practice that allow you to be able to start to work and create space for yourself to be able to build more awareness in your life. And I think that can often lead to realizing, I would like to talk to someone else about this issue. And then therapy can be a great resource. We have a survey that you take when you come to reflect. And we don't talk about diagnosis. We ask, what are the things you're stressed about? Because we recognize that you could benefit from therapy even before there's a diagnosis.
Mhm.
And obviously, if the other end of the spectrum, if it's something that's very urgent, we always say that if it's a life-threatening issue, you should go to the emergency room or talk to a professional. That spectrum is so wide and it's so nuanced. So it's about understanding what works for you. And even within therapy, there are different types of therapy and there are different types of therapists. And so there is not a one-size-fits-all for every person.
Let's hold that thought for a sec. We'll get right back to it. This episode is sponsored by Via. We all know there are things that can help set the mood in the bedroom, but did you know a little THC could also do that? Yes, Via has developed a unique blend of pleasure-enhancing cannabinoids, libido-strengthening herbs, and a low dose of THC all into one mind-blowing gummy called High Love. This gummy, wow, it will awaken your senses, increase blood flow, and intensify any sexual experience. I've been pleasantly surprised by the High Love gummies because it is just the right amount of THC for me to have a good time without feeling sleepy. And hey, if THC is not your thing, Via also offers a wide array of other gummies without it. And everything legally ships in 50 states with discreet packaging directly to your door. So if you're over 21, you can get 15% off and a free pack of award-winning Dreams THC plus CBN sleep gummies with our exclusive code DATEABLE at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com. Let the gummies work their magic. Head to viahemp.com and use the code DATEABLE to receive 15% off and one free sample of their Sleepy Dream gummies. That's viahemp.com and use the code DATEABLE at checkout. Take your passion and pleasure to a whole new level with High Love from Via Hemp. This episode is made possible by Badlands Pets. As you all know, Mojo, my precious baby, is the reason why I found love in the first place. He made me feel love again. So I would do anything to ensure his health and longevity. And actress Katherine Heigl and I have that in common. She's helped save over 16,000 dogs through her foundation. And after doing a ton of research, she feels there's one place we can look to improve any dog's health, and that's their food. So fortunately, she found that just by adding a few special superfoods to her dog's food, she saw huge transformations in their health. So she's made a 20-minute video explaining step by step how anyone can do the same thing to see incredible changes in their dog's health. I've definitely re-looked at what I'm feeding Mojo and making sure that, hey, he only has one life to live, and I want to make sure it's the best damn life. So if you want to keep your dog healthy and happy, go to badlandsfood.com/dateable and watch Catherine's video right now. Again, that's badlandsfood.com/dateable. This episode is made possible by Armoire. Armoire makes getting dressed easy. With a clothing rental membership from Armoire, build the perfect wardrobe with brands that are high quality, unique, and recommended just for you. All you have to do is take a 5-minute style quiz and select items from your dynamic, personalized closet. The styles show up at your door in as little as 2 days. Then when you're ready for new clothes, just swap them out. Listen, I live in Southern California. There is absolutely no need for puffer coats or any sort of those winter jackets. But when I travel anywhere else in the world in these cold months, I'm often burdened with the task of getting winter clothes. And now with Armoire, I can just rent my winter wardrobe. It's brilliant. Right now, our listeners can give Armoire a try and get up to 50% off their first month. That's up to $125 off. Just visit armoire.style/dateable. That is armoire.style, spelled ARMOIRE.style/DATEABLE to get up to 50% off your first month and never worry about what to wear again. Try Armoire today.
I started actually on BetterHelp, which was the online one.
Yeah.
And I found that it was easier, right? Like you could literally get started by clicking a button and they match you with someone and you don't leave your house and you just chat online. It was great, like intro to therapy for me because I feel like therapy felt very daunting.
Yeah.
Like I was like, how do I find someone? What do I do? Like, I don't know if I want to like talk to someone and sit in the couch and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like my intro. And then I did that for probably like 6 months or so. And then I was like, I feel like I've kind of got the most I can out of this. I think I'd like to be able to talk through things with a therapist, like actually meet. And that's actually how I found Reflect. So I feel like the BetterHelp was kind of like a segue to get to like actual talk therapy.
And I think for me was talking to Julie was a great introduction. Talking to other people who've gone through the process is so much better than reading about it online. Because then I can hear like how Julie benefited from it for herself and how someone else benefited from it from themselves. I've also done a lot of quizzes online. I think
Princess are you?
like self-assessing is so interesting in general, right? Then I know what my triggers are. I know what my schemas are. Just getting to know yourself better through these resources is a great way too.
So this conversation obviously was triggered by all the recent suicides. So I guess just to not to end on a bad note, but I want to talk a little further about suicide and kind of when you get to that point and what you can do for help there too.
Yeah. This is a place where I think when we do feel alone, and suicide oftentimes such a long journey to get to that point. And I think it's really important to realize that there are so many options along the way. Obviously, the National Suicide Hotline is huge. And there are resources online for folks who are feeling like they're immediately looking for that as a last resort. But it's really, I think, important to think about what happens before. And I think suicide's become something where it draws national attention. It's a topic that we all recognize as really severe.
Yes.
But just like with physical health, a heart attack can be something that we can deal with and work on way before that happens.
Right.
It's similarly with suicide, it's harder to talk about it from the point of view of the person who's in that situation. I think if you're in that situation, it's important to remember that you do have other people around you, and taking the time to pause and when the disease isn't taking over and you can see more optionality, right? When someone ends up killing themselves, oftentimes there are loved ones that always come up and say, I wish I had known.
Yes.
I would have been there for that person.
Totally.
The problem is when you're feeling bad, the optionality and the activation energy required to call somebody else and ask for the help is so great.
Yeah.
So I think what I always advise is for all of us to be a little bit more vulnerable in our conversations with those that we care about.
Yeah.
To always say, when I was feeling bad, I remember friends would say to me, if it's 3 a.m, something bad's happening, I'm always here for you. I know that.
Yeah.
But oftentimes when you feel alone, it's not that point. I never gotten to that point.
Yeah.
It's all the points leading up to that point.
Absolutely.
And so the only thing, the one thing that we can do is to say to other people, we are there for you.
Yep.
We are a resource. Checking in with friends. Even, I had a good friend of mine who went through a tough time. And for a long time, I would just text him randomly and say, just thinking about you. Hope all is, hope you're doing okay.
And that can mean so
chat?
much. I know like when I was going through a period, like just getting stuff like that was really made a huge difference.
Yeah.
And and you don't need anything in return.
No.
The person may not even text you back. But I think oftentimes my friends will say, well, I know you're really busy, so I don't want to be a burden for you. That's why I'm not texting you. But I think the fear of being a burden leads to this further feeling of isolation.
Yes.
That then can make someone feel like there's no one there that cares for them. And so I think when you are the loved ones and before it gets to that situation, if we can all just try to practice to be able to be more vulnerable and talk about it. And I think one of the greatest gifts of founding Reflect is having these really great honest conversations and these sometimes awkward and tough conversations with my friends who said to me, I never tell anyone this, but I had a really tough time. And I think knowing that you're not alone in that feeling actually is really empowering. That is actually one major solution to not feeling lonely is actually realizing that other people are there for you.
Like you're saying, it's not just the act of suicide, because that's what gets the media attention.
Right.
But it's a series of events and situations that lead up to that. That's what's most important. That's where people need help. And I think one of the things we do in the society is that we were saying we push through things, we avoid, we cope. But now imagine a world where you don't need to cope with it anymore. You have tools to help you to get through them, when you have tools to help you get better. It's like, imagine if you went through your life with poor eyesight and you had no idea. You've just been seeing the world in a very fuzzy way. And one day someone gives you glasses and you're like, holy shit, I could have been seeing the world like this my whole life. I had no idea. Of course, you were still a functioning human being. It's not like life or death in that situation. But imagine if you could just see the world in a much clearer way.
So this is a great segue. Let's do some takeaways of this whole
Takeaways.
conversation. This has been phenomenal. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for being
Thank
here.
you.
Yeah. Where should we start?
I don't even know where to start. I think for me, probably this whole like concept of the spectrum of mental health, I think is really, really eye-opening. Because like I think some of it you think of like, I think that definition you mentioned, like removing mental illness, depression, PSTD, bipolar disorder, like all this stuff. And it's like, yes, that is definitely some of it. But I like this notion of a spectrum, like you can be there at some points.
Everybody experiences some sort of mental health issues.
Yep.
So it's not just about getting diagnosed with some kind of disease or illness. It's how you're feeling, and only you know how you're feeling. It's okay to recognize that. I think like the biggest takeaway for me is to normalize mental health. It's not mental illness. It is mental health. It's all about going to the gym to exercise your mental health so that you're able to live life in a much stronger, resilient way.
Right.
And just like we were saying, just like you go to the gym for your body, why wouldn't you do something for your mental health as well?
I think some of my other takeaway is just like how, like, I think a lot of times people don't associate mental health and dating.
Mm-hmm.
And like we were talking about, it's so much like the apps are what's wrong, my city's what's wrong, all this stuff. So I think, at least for me, I probably had the most success time dating is when I actually took that break to assess what was going on mentally and get to a place that I felt happier. So I think that so much of it is related to mental health.
And then on the flip side, if you are fatigued by dating because of, you know, you think like the people you're matching with on apps have these glorious, wonderful lives and they're dating all these other fabulous people and they're ignoring you. Think about that everyone's going through some sort of mental health journey. So you don't know what someone's going through. You can't make any of these assumptions.
Yeah, I think that's the other huge takeaway is like you are just yourself. Like you cannot just project what you're feeling onto someone else.
Yeah.
And I think like if people are struggling with mental health, like just being open and communicative, like it will go a long way with both partners. With the person facing it, they will feel better if they let someone in. Most people get the most enjoyment out of relationships. That's why so many of us are depressed about it or have anxiety about it, is because at the end of the day, relationships are what makes most of us the happiest.
Yeah.
And I think the aspect of if you're facing something, sharing that, and then if you're the person of the loved one, being able to be there for someone and kind of understand what's going on instead of spiraling out of control of your own thoughts is the best way to handle anything.
Yeah, communication is so important, and also realizing when you do need space, because if you are being frustrated, if you're feeling frustrated with dating, it's also okay to take a pause and work on yourself for a little bit and then go back into dating with fresh set of eyes and a fresh mentality. Because just like you, if you're somebody who's tired of running, if you're training for a marathon, you got to take some days off and not run.
And
because you're tired.
If you're like dating and you're depressed that you're single still, and you're depressed that no one calls you back, and all this stuff, and it's like ruining the other aspects of your life, or you're feeling anxiety about that text message, like dating's supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
And it's going to like spill over onto those dates too if you're depressed and anxious about dating.
Yeah, dating is never the solution for your mental health. People kind of feel like, oh, once I get in a relationship, I'll be much happier.
Dating is not the solution to loneliness.
Dating
is not the solution.
I know a lot of people who are in relationships and are still lonely.
Right.
So it's not a solution at all. Yeah. So I think it's good to talk about this. And, you know, even if therapy is not an option for you right now, just opening up this conversation with your family and your friends is a great first step. Just talking out loud is a great first step. Start journaling, you know, get to know yourself better. And I like that Jonathan said, sometimes you feel these things bother you and sometimes they don't. So on the days when these things don't bother you, that's when you should start journaling why it doesn't bother you on those days. What are you doing differently? And so next time you feel them again, you know how to deal with it.
It's a great point. And for anyone that is interested in therapy, I highly recommend Reflect.
Well, how does Reflect work?
You basically just take a quiz and then Reflect matches you.
Quizzes.
I love quizzes.
And then Reflect matches you for free. So I think like it's a really great way to like easily connect with someone and not have to like be like, where do I even start? How do I find this person?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for me, when I was going through the process, what was really hard was just knowing what I needed and knowing who would be right for me.
Yeah.
And I'd call, and some people wouldn't call me, therapists wouldn't call me back. And so it was a
Right.
very hard process. And so we've made that process really easy through a data-driven matching process. And like Julie said, you take a short quiz, and we actually match you to a few therapists, 1, 2, or 3. And you have the option of doing a video or phone-based consultation with them now. And what's great is we help meet you where you're at. If you're busy and it's easier to do a phone conversation. But the key is that we use over 150 variables to match someone with the right therapist.
It's like dating.
It's like dating.
It's an algorithm.
And it really is. Actually, the number one predictor of success in therapy is what's called therapeutic alliance, or FIT. And so we actually collect data on our therapists, and we collect data on the clients through the survey. And so we match you with using data that even the therapist doesn't have on themselves.
Interesting.
And 90% of those who go through our process find a therapist that they like.
Yeah. I think like for me, when I did it, like all of them were great, but one of them definitely felt like very spiritual. The one I ended up going to, who I loved, she was like more practical. So I think some of it wasn't like one was bad or good. It was just like, what's the right fit for you?
Well, yeah, even when we had Dr. Rachel on the show, a therapist herself, she says she has a few therapists for herself.
Yeah.
She has one that's more spiritual, one's more practical, and sometimes you might just need more than one therapist depending on what mood you're in.
Yeah.
Right?
Or depending on where you are and like what stage you're going through.
And that's what's great is we have clients who stay in therapy for a while, and they decide, hey, this is a great fit, but I want to try out something different.
Yeah.
And so the ability so once you find a great fit, we help with the scheduling and billing and provide tools to make the whole process really easy and allow you to get the most out of the therapy experience.
Yeah.
But one of those things is also if you feel like you'd like to be rematched, or if you, after some time, want to take a pause and try something else, knowing that Reflect is there and you're not having to do it all over again on your own is really great.
Totally.
Another obstacle people have when it comes to therapy is the price.
Yes.
People think therapy is very pricey. So how does Reflect handle that?
Yeah, I think about that a lot. And for me, if it's something that we should all do, we shouldn't wait till it's really bad. Many times, because therapy is so expensive and so hard to find, we end up pushing it off. And when I started Reflect, I really felt like I wanted to create something different. And so we've partnered with hundreds of therapists in the Bay Area. So we're the largest self-pay network of therapists in the Bay Area. And all our sessions are $95 per session.
That's pretty good because typically, what is it, like 150 to 250?
Yeah.
And I think because for us, it's really great that we have phenomenal therapists on our platform that are master's and doctorate level, top of their field. But they also believe that it's important for people not to wait till it's really bad. Even with the $95, we can help with out-of-network insurance billing. We can help with FSA and HSA billing. So the whole goal is to, working on ourselves is something that's already such a focus area, and it's sometimes can be hard. We want everything around that to feel as easy as possible.
Yeah, with my insurance, it ended up being like $50 a session.
Wow, that's really good.
Yeah, that's like going to the gym.
That is
like
really going to the gym. Yeah.
It's way cheaper than personal training.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like people spend a ton of money on personal training thinking that's what's going to lead to results. And it could also, I don't want to say it's not, but just as much mentally is there as well.
And if someone's not in the Bay Area, can they still access care?
Yeah, so we are only live in the Bay Area right now, but if someone's interested in getting care, they can always reach out to us, or they can, Psychology Today is another resource online for those outside of the Bay Area.
Got it, okay.
But yeah, if you're in the Bay Area, if you're outside the Bay Area and still have questions, we'd love to be a resource regardless, because, we have great therapists and great clients who are looking for therapy from all over the country that are reaching out to us now. And so I think it's a problem that extends well beyond the Bay Area.
For sure.
It definitely is.
Definitely. Well,
mental health is definitely having a moment, like you said, Julie.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. This has been a great conversation.
Of course. And we've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time. It's not just so much like it shouldn't be reactive. Mental health should never be reactive. Oh, I'm feeling so bad. I'm feeling so lonely. I'm feeling so depressed. It should be preventative care. And I think we should all take that and make it a priority in our lives.
And I think what Jonathan mentioned, though, if it is to a point that it's a medical emergency, like always use the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 800 273-8255.
Yes. And for those who want to look for a therapist, you can find Reflect at joinreflect.com.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And you are single, so we'll pimp you out right now, too, if anybody wants to meet Jonathan.
Thanks, guys. 2 for 1.
2 for 1 right here. You're welcome. All right, let's wrap this up. We want to hear from you, our listeners. If you have a topic you want to share on our show, we would love to have you as a guest on our show. You can always be anonymous. We can change your name. So there you go. There's really no reason not to come on our show. Check out our website, dateablepodcast.com. Thank you so much again, Jonathan, and stay dateable. Your action item for this week is to make mental health a priority. So in addition to possibly seeking therapy, there are other ways to also exercise your mental health, just like we exercise our bodies. Is it getting out and walking around, exploring nature? Is it taking up a new hobby? Is it exploring your artistic and creative sides? Make mental health a priority. You deserve it.
This episode of Dateable is brought to you by 500 Brunches. 500 Brunches connects like-minded people with similar interests to meet in real life over brunch. You answer a quick questionnaire about your interests and how you spend your time, and then they'll match you in small groups of 6 to 8 at a brunch spot in San Francisco. Get a free entry into a brunch now by signing up at 500brunches.com and using the code DATEABLE. If you didn't know already, we have a revamped website with articles, videos, and content all about modern dating. You can also find our premium Why series, where we dissect, analyze, and offer solutions to some of the most common dating conundrums. We've had some great feedback about how actionable these episodes are, so check them out on our website or iTunes Music. Also, visit the site today to see the latest about coaching, where we connect you with Dateable-approved experts to help with everything from dating profile reviews, coaching, and even gathering real feedback about your dating style in a personalized and affordable way. To connect with us, visit dateablepodcast.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all under Dateable Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and auto-download the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast player so you never miss an episode.